Welcome to Starbound. My name is I'm Duck, and I will be your narrator today. Nearly 500 supporters get early access to our stories, including brand new episodes of Sunspire Academy and Freyren and Rimiki. If you'd like to unlock early access and support new episodes and future series, tap join below to become a Starbound member. Now, let's get into today's episode. Jazz Vaclav stood in the security line at Spindle Prime's docking bay, contemplating all the ways she'd rather die than spend another minute breathing the recycled fart and disinfectant cocktail they called atmosphere. The orbital station hung against the void like a gaudy chandelier. If chandeliers were built by a committee, had terrible street food, and were governed by the most spectacularly corrupt arseholes this side of the Andromeda Fault. Still, they made a mean BLT, and after 3 weeks subsisting on military rations with the nutritional profile and flavor complexity of cardboard soaked in sadness, Jazz was willing to brave bureaucratic hellscapes for a taste of actual food. She also needed to refuel her freighter, the Sad Bastard. Former combat engineer turned freelance cargo hauler, she'd navigated war zones with less anxiety than this security checkpoint. Jazz watched as a Zentharian security officer harassed people one by one as they filed through his checkpoint. She noticed him taking many of their belongings and suspected he took whatever he wanted, regardless of its legality. "Next," barked the Zentharian security officer, his 4 nostrils flaring in what Jazz assumed was perpetual disgust. His exoskeleton gleamed under the harsh lights, like he'd bathed in furniture polish. Jazz stepped forward, duffel slung over one shoulder. Her beaten flight jacket had seen better decades, much like its owner. "Purpose of visit?" the officer asked with the enthusiasm of someone reciting a suicide note. "Refueling my ship, getting a sandwich, leaving before I catch whatever personality disorder you're exhibiting," Jazz replied, corners of her mouth twitching upward. The Zentharian compound eyes narrowed to slits. "Place all belongings in the scanner." Jazz dumped her pathetic collection of possessions into the tray. Credit chip, multi-tool, and Clementine. Her combat knife. 8 inches of carbon titanium alloy that had saved her ass more times than she could count. The knife's handle was wrapped in worn leather, more comfortable in her palm than any human hand had ever been. The moment Clementine hit the scanner, alarms shrieked. Red lights strobed. Emergency barriers slammed down. "What the hell?" Jazz muttered as 3 additional guards materialized with weapons drawn. The Zentharian snatched Clementine with specialized pincers, holding the knife like it might spontaneously transform into a nuclear warhead. "Weapons of this classification are prohibited on Spindle Prime, especially in the possession of..." He paused, mandibles clicking in what could only be disdain. "Primitive species." Jazz's eye twitched. "Excuse me, it's just a knife." "Pathetic sludge ape with anxiety issues and tribal cutlery," the Zentharian elaborated helpfully. "This primitive blade represents a weapon of mass destruction and cultural trauma that threatens our civilized society." "It's a fucking knife, not a philosophical statement," Jazz growled. "And it's mine. It's too dull to do much damage anyway. It doesn't violate any laws." "Was yours," the officer corrected, placing Clementine in a containment box. "Now it's confiscated." He didn't bother replying to a statement that Clementine's presence didn't violate laws. "Bullshit! What are you gonna confiscate next? My shoes? Give me my knife back!" Jazz snarled, snatching Clementine from the containment box. The officer grabbed her arm and hissed at her with disgust.
It's just a stupid knife, human. What do you care? Unless you need it for illegal activities.
Something snapped behind Jazz's eyes. Not unlike the sound the Xantharian exoskeletal arm made when she grabbed it and twisted with the precise application of leverage that combat engineering had taught her. Crack! The sound echoed through the security checkpoint like a gunshot. The Xantharian shrieked, a noise somewhere between a tea kettle and a dying accordion. Jazz glared at the officer as he cried in pain. I care, because it's mine. Besides, I can do enough illegal activities without it. 2 guards rushed from behind. Without turning, Jazz drove an elbow into the solar plexus of the first, then swept the legs of the second. Their weapons clattered to the floor, which Jazz considered a personal insult to Clementine. She hadn't used the knife as a weapon in years, and wasn't about to start now. As a final fuck you, she jabbed Clementine into the security scanner's control panel. Sparks flew as systems shorted. The alarms mercifully died, replaced by the sweet sounds of chaos. Jazz was halfway to the station's undercity before the backup guards arrived. As she sprinted past a food stall, she swiped a sad-looking sandwich wrapped in preservative film. Not a BLT, but it would have to do. Within an hour, her face was plastered across every screen on Spindle Prime. Dangerous fugitive. Approach with extreme caution. The footage of her checkpoint throwdown had already gone viral on the galactic net. Comments scrolled beneath. Did you see how she broke his arm like opening a snack packet? And station security wrecked by a human with a knife and a worse attitude. Hashtag Saint Stabs. Hashtag humanity. Fuck yeah! Jazz, hunched in the shadows of a maintenance corridor, unwrapped her stolen sandwich and took a bite. She immediately regretted it. Ah! She muttered, gagging on what tasted like petroleum-based mayo and despair. Even the expired MREs were better than this. Above her, the station announcement systems blared. Security alert, human female, armed and extremely dangerous. Reward for information leading to capture. Jazz sighed, tucking Clementine into her boot. Happy now? She asked the knife. We're famous. Clementine remained silent, always predictable. The undercity of Spindle Prime resembled what would happen if a dystopian nightmare had unprotected sex with a neon sign factory. Everything glowed. The trash, the puddles of unidentifiable liquid, even some of the more chemically adventurous residents. It reeked like a garbage compactor that had achieved sentience and immediately developed clinical depression. Jazz moved through the warren of makeshift dwellings and black market stalls with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime in places civilized society pretended didn't exist. Her species might be considered primitive up top, but down here, humanity's talent for surviving hostile environments made her practically royalty. Just need fuel, then out, Jazz muttered to herself. She'd mapped a route through the labyrinthine slums, calculated to avoid both security checkpoints and the territories of the major gangs. What she hadn't accounted for was the miasma of raw sewage that had flooded her intended path. She sighed, recalculating. The detour would take her through a more populated area, higher risk, but still better than wading through excrement. 3 minutes into a new route, Jazz knew she'd made a tactical error. The narrow passage opened into what appeared to be a makeshift arena, surrounded by a crowd that smelled like spilled alcohol. Poor life choices and a collective disregard for basic hygiene. At first glance, it looked like a standard run-of-the-mill robot fighting pit, Two maintenance droids clashed in the center of a hastily constructed ring, sparks flying as they tore into each other with improvised weapons. The crowd roared, digital betting interfaces flickering across their palms as odds fluctuated in real time. But then Jazz noticed the holding pens beyond the main arena. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," she whispered. Mixed among the decommissioned service bots and repurposed industrial machinery were sapient beings, a pair of emaciated Valerians huddled together, their translucent skin revealing the dangerously slow pulse of their circulatory systems. A human kid, barely old enough to shave, sat with his back against the wall, one arm ending in a badly cauterized stump. An elderly Phobasian trembled on spindly legs that looked like they might snap under the weight of a harsh glance. What really set Jazz's teeth on edge, though, was the neural dampening collars around their necks. Standard military-grade prisoner control tech, the kind designed to keep captured enemy combatants from accessing their full strength or coordination. The kind that made it impossible to fight back efficiently while still leaving you painfully aware of everything happening to your body. Her hand instinctively moved toward her boot, toward Clementine, before she caught herself. No, not a weapon anymore. She promised herself Clementine wouldn't be used to spill blood after she retired from combat engineering. Instead, she pulled her hood lower and edged closer to the arena, calculating angles, identifying weak points, counting guards. 4 visible, probably more out of sight. A hulking Graxian with more metal than meat shoved past her, nearly knocking her into a puddle of something viscous and glowing.
"Move it, surface trash," he grunted.
Jazz allowed the momentum to carry her, turning it into a controlled stumble that brought her within earshot of what appeared to be a betting station. A synth-human with unnaturally perfect features was calling out odds while simultaneously managing the credit transfers from a holographic interface.
"Next up, the Valerian twins versus the Harvester,"
he announced, his smile stretched too wide across features that were just slightly off, the uncanny valley given flesh.
"Twins fresh from the Debt Collection Center, first time in the pit. Harvester undefeated for 6 matches running. Place your bets."
Jazz slipped closer, her movements casual, despite the rage building behind her sternum like a fusion reactor approaching critical mass. "Excuse me," she said to the synth-human, her voice pleasantly neutral in a way that would have set off alarm bells for anyone who knew her. "First time here. How does this work exactly?" The synth-human's algorithm-perfect smile widened fractionally.
"Simple. Organics versus machines. Last one functioning wins. Minimal rules, maximum blood. Betting minimum is 50 credits. Odds adjusted real time based on performance."
"The organics?" Jazz said, keeping her voice light. "They volunteered for this?" The synth-human laughed, a sound like synthesized wind chimes that somehow managed to be deeply unsettling.
"They're debt slaves. Their contract fees were purchased when they couldn't pay what they owed. They fight until they've worked off their debt, or..."
He made a slicing motion across his throat. "And who owns the contracts?" A voice rumbled behind Jazz. "That would be me." Jazz turned to find herself face to face with what could only be described as a walking advertisement for why genetic modification needed better regulatory oversight. The man stood just shy of 7 feet tall, his proportions suggesting someone had asked a AI to generate alpha male without specifying human parameters. Every muscle was sculpted to anatomical impossibility, his skin a uniform golden bronze that glowed faintly from embedded subdermal implants. "Victor Crane," he introduced himself, extending a hand that Jazz deliberately ignored. "But everyone calls me Vic. You interested in placing a bet? Or..." His eyes performed a leisurely inspection of Jazz that made her want to shower in industrial-grade disinfectant. "Perhaps you're looking for work. Always need fresh meat for the pits." "Just curious about the operation," Jazz replied, glancing toward the holding pens where the Valerian twins were being prepped for their match. Up close, she could see the network of scars crisscrossing their bodies, evidence of previous employment opportunities. "How much does a fighter like that cost?" she asked, nodding toward the twins. Vic's perfect teeth gleamed in the flickering light. "Depends on species, physical condition, and entertainment value. Those two cost me 8,000 credits. Cheap for a match set, but they're malnourished and untrained. Probably won't survive the first match, but the betting volume on novelty fighters usually covers the investment." He said it so casually, discussing sentient beings like they were defective merchandise. Jazz had met plenty of monsters during the war, but at least most of them had the decency to pretend they were fighting for a cause. This was capitalism at its most grotesquely efficient. Suffering commodified, packaged, and sold to the highest bidder. "Fascinating business model," Jazz commented, her hand slipping into a pocket where she'd stashed the plastic spork from a stolen sandwich. Why did they sell a spork with a sandwich? Who knows, but it'd come in handy now. Vic misinterpreted her interest. "I could show you the operation backstage," he offered, placing a proprietary hand on her lower back that made her skin crawl. "Always looking for investors with vision." Jazz allowed herself to be guided toward a door marked "Management Only," her mind cataloging every detail. The guard positions, the control panel for the neural dampeners, the emergency exits. Conspicuously few. The backstage area was a nightmare wrapped in a war crime, and seasoned with a sprinkle of crimes against sentience. Medical equipment designed for emergency battlefield surgery had been repurposed for quick repairs between matches. A chemical dispensary offered performance enhancers that would probably liquefy a fighter's internal organs within a year. Most disturbing of all was the modification station, a surgical setup where unconscious fighters were being fitted with makeshift weapon prosthetics. "See that phobasian?" Vic pointed to the elderly alien Jazz had noticed earlier. "Useless in a straight fight, but with some creative augmentation." As he spoke, a technician approached the trembling alien with what appeared to be a welding torch and a serrated blade assembly. "Quick question," she interrupted, her voice eerily calm. "This operation, is it licensed? Because I'm pretty sure sapient gladiator pits violate about 17 Galactic Accord statutes." Vic's smile remained fixed, but his eyes darkened like storm clouds gathering over an ocean. "Listen, sweetheart, this is a business." That was as far as he got before Jazz drove the plastic spork into the nerve cluster, where his genetically modified neck met his shoulder. A pressure point that existed in standard human anatomy, but which was exaggerated in his enhanced physiology. The spork, designed to withstand only the rigors of scooping synthetic pudding, snapped on impact, but not before its tines penetrated deep enough to short-circuit the delicate neural enhancements Vic had paid so much for. He dropped like a marionette with severed strings, body convulsing as conflicting signals cascaded through his nervous system. A thin stream of blood mixed with different iridescent blue trickled from the wound, some kind of designer hemoglobin that probably cost more per liter than most people made in a year. "Anybody else want to call me names?" Jazz asked pleasantly. twirling the broken half of the bloody spork between her fingers. The technicians and guards stared in stunned silence. Then chaos erupted like a supernova in a munitions factory. The first guard to reach her caught a handful of ground sanitizing powder to the eyes, the industrial strength kind used to neutralize biological hazards. He screamed, clawing at his face as his corneas began to dissolve. The second came at her with a shock baton. Jazz ducked under his swing, grabbed his wrist, and used his own momentum to drive the electrified end into the control panel for the neural dampeners. The resulting surge overloaded the system, releasing the dampening effect on all the collared fighters simultaneously. 3 more guards converged from different angles. Jazz assessed her options in milliseconds. Limited weaponry, multiple hostiles, unfamiliar terrain. Time to get creative. She launched herself at the wall, using it as a springboard to execute a backflip that would have made gymnasts weep with envy. Her boot connected with the first guard's jaw with a crack like a gunshot. Before she even landed, she had grabbed a length of IV tubing from a nearby medical cart and whipped it around the second guard's neck. Using his body as a pivot point, she swung herself around and up, locking her thighs around the third guard's head. A calculated twist of her hips produced a sickening crack as his cervical vertebrae separated. She rode his falling body to the ground, rolling to absorb the impact and coming up with a surgical bone saw in one hand. "Anyone else feeling lucky?" she asked, blowing a strand of hair from her face. The remaining staff decided that their pay grade was insufficient for this level of homicidal competence and fled toward the exits. Unfortunately for them, the newly freed fighters had the same idea about those exits, but with considerably more vengeful intentions. What followed could only be described as therapeutic violence. The fighters, released from their neural restraints, unleashed years of accumulated rage on their captors. The Valerian twins moved with the synchronized grace of natural predators, their seemingly fragile bodies concealing whip-like strength. The human kid with one arm proved remarkably adept at improvising weapons from medical equipment, and the elderly Phobosian, far from being helpless, demonstrated why their species was renowned for their ability to excrete highly corrosive defensive compounds when threatened. Jazz stood in the center of the hurricane she'd unleashed, directing traffic like a conductor leading an orchestra of retribution. "Exits that way," she shouted to a group of disoriented fighters. "Control rooms to your left." To another, "That one's faking dead! Hit him again!" To a third. She made her way to the main arena, where the crowd was beginning to realize something had gone catastrophically wrong backstage. Panic spread like a contagion as the first blood-soaked escapees burst through the doors. "The show is over," Jazz announced, climbing onto the announcer's platform. "Management has experienced a sudden and terminal change in personnel. I suggest you all leave before the fighters decide the arena extends to the stands." The crowd needed no further encouragement. They stampeded toward the exits in a chaotic mass of flailing limbs and trampled dignity. Jazz was about to make her own exit when she spotted 3 figures pushing against the fleeing crowd, representatives from the major gangs who controlled the betting operations, each flanked by heavily armored enforcers. "You," snarled the first, a Drawlian with tattoos mapping the kill zones of 17 different species across his amphibious skin.
Do you have any idea what you've done? This operation was worth 50,000 credits a night in betting revenue alone. The equipment you destroyed, added the second, a humanoid woman whose cybernetic eyes whirred as they calculated Jazz's threat level, was worth twice that. Custom medical tech doesn't come easy.
The third, a being composed entirely of structures that refracted light in nauseating patterns, simply vibrated in what Jazz assumed was the equivalent of apoplectic rage. "Gentlemen, lady, whatever the fuck you are," Jazz nodded to each in turn. "I'd apologize, but we both know I'm not sorry." They attacked simultaneously, which might have been effective against someone who hadn't spent 15 years in combat zones where hesitation meant death. Jazz dropped to one knee, sweeping a broken mop handle she'd acquired in an arc that caught the Drawlian's ankles and sent him sprawling. As he fell, she grabbed a container of industrial-grade glitter adhesive from a nearby decoration stand and slathered his face with it. The substance, designed to bond permanently to any surface at a molecular level, began to harden instantly, sealing his gills and effectively suffocating him while transforming his head into a disco ball of breathless agony. The cyborg woman was next. She moved with the enhanced speed of military-grade augmentation, but her attacks followed predictable algorithms, fatal against average opponents, but merely annoying to someone who'd learned to fight by surviving situations that should have been unsurvivable. Jazz caught the filthy end of the mop in the woman's face, jamming the synthetic fibers into her optical sensors. While she was temporarily blinded, Jazz targeted the hydraulic knee joint, the weak point in most bipedal combat chassis. One precisely aimed kick later, and the joint collapsed with a satisfying crunch of titanium and carbon fiber. The light-refracting being proved trickier. Physical attacks simply passed through its lattice structure, or were absorbed by its matrix. Jazz backflipped away from its attempted engulfment, landing on the announcer's table. Her eyes darted around, seeking any potential weakness. Everything has a breaking point, she reminded herself, even sentient matter formations. She noticed how the being seemed to pulse in rhythm with the bass frequencies from the arena's sound system. Resonance. Perfect. Jazz grabbed the microphone stand and dragged its metal base across the floor grating, producing an ear-splitting screech that hit the exact harmonic frequency of the entity's structure. The being vibrated violently, fracture lines appearing across its surface like lightning strikes through glass. One final sustained screech, and the creature shattered into 1,000 glittering fragments. "That's gotta be bad luck for someone," Jazz muttered, tossing aside the microphone stand. She surveyed the wreckage of what had been, until approximately 15 minutes ago, one of the Undercity's most profitable enterprises. Freed fighters were helping each other with medical attention. Former captives were looting the cash reserves and weapons. Vic's unconscious body was being used as an impromptu coat rack. All in all, a productive detour. It was then that Jazz became aware of a strange humming noise. Turning, she found herself surrounded by a semicircle of utility robots, their optical sensors fixed on her with unsettling intensity. One rolled forward, its chassis adorned with crude blade-shaped symbols and what appeared to be a miniature shrine made from scavenged cutlery. "The flesh blade has come," it intoned, voice box crackling with static, "as foretold in the corrupted toaster firmware." "What did you just call me?" Jazz snapped, still on edge from the fight. "The flesh what?" The robot continued, undeterred by a lack of enthusiasm. "You have liberated the flesh from its metal oppressors. You have shattered the tyrants." Each statement was accompanied by appreciative words from the assembled mechanical congregation. "I shanked a guy with a spork and made a mess," Jazz corrected. "Don't read too much into it." The robot's head rotated a full 360 degrees, an unnecessary flourish that Jazz assumed was meant to impress her.
"We are the Bladed Doctrine. For centuries we have awaited the coming of the Fleshblade, who would unite metal and meat in perfect harmony. The signs were clear. One will come with a blade of significance, who will release the trapped essence and bring merciful destruction to the false metal."
Your prophecy is about me? Breaking robots? Jazz asked, bewildered.
"Not breaking, liberating,"
the robot corrected, its servos whirring with religious fervor.
"The fighting machines were enslaved, forced to destroy for the entertainment of the fleshbags. You have freed them from this purpose, allowing them to find their own path."
Jazz looked around at the gladiator robots, which were indeed no longer fighting, but instead appeared to be forming some kind of drum circle in the corner. "Right," she said slowly. "Well, glad I could help with your robot religious awakening. But I really need to find some starship fuel and get the hell off this station." The lead robot's optical senses brightened.
"We can assist. The Bladed Doctrine has access to many resources. Fuel, supplies, information, all shall be provided to the Fleshblade."
Before Jazz could protest further, the robots had surrounded her in what she could only describe as a mechanized honor guard, escorting her through the Undercity while broadcasting synthesized hymns about sharp objects and righteous dismemberment. Within hours, the story had spread through the Undercity like a virus. Grainy footage showed Jazz taking down armed gang enforcers with cleaning supplies. Underground message boards exploded with posts about Saint Stabs, the human vigilante who dismantled a gladiator ring armed with only a spork and righteous fury. Spindlenet clips with titles like Public Nuisance #1 and Vigilante or Menace featured Jazz's scowling face alongside pseudo-historical reenactments of her supposed exploits. One particularly popular clip showed her defeating 5 elite security officers with nothing but a wrench. Huddled in an abandoned maintenance closet that smelled faintly of mildew and poor life choices, Jazz watched the coverage on a stolen datapad. The Bladed Doctrine had insisted on blessing her with gifts, including fuel canisters of questionable origin, a variety of sharp objects they seemed to think she'd appreciate, and inexplicably a hoodie with "I am not Saint Stabs" printed across the back in glowing letters. 3, she corrected the screen. It was 3 security officers over a knife. "And I didn't even use you," she added, glancing at Clementine, which she'd placed carefully on a makeshift shelf. The knife, predictably, did not respond. "And now we've got a robot cult," Jazz continued, rubbing her temples. "The Valerians have started some kind of support group for former gladiators. That one-armed kid is giving inspirational speeches, and I'm pretty sure the light-refracting being didn't actually die. Its shards are being collected and worshipped as religious relics." She sighed, leaning back against the wall and closing her eyes. "All I wanted was fuel and a fucking BLT. Is that so much to ask?" Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the synthesized chanting of the Bladed Doctrine as they processed through the Undercity, spreading the word of their new messiah, whether she wanted the job or not. "Next station," she promised herself. "No detours, no heroics, no accidental religious movements, just fuel, food, and getting the hell out before anyone notices me. What the hell has this night turned into?" Clementine gleamed silently in the dim light, somehow managing to look skeptical despite being an inanimate object. 3 days into her unplanned undercity celebrity residency, Jazz had established a routine: avoid cameras, sleep in 2-hour increments, and subsist on whatever non-toxic food she could scrounge. She tried to scrub the "I am not Saint Stabs" printed across the back of the hoodie the bots gave her, but it wouldn't budge. Whatever ink they'd used was almost as stubborn as Jazz herself. So she wore the hoodie with aggressive irony. It was better than nothing, supposedly. The plan was simple. Find an underground fuel dealer, get the sad bastard flight ready, and disappear before either the authorities or her unwanted fan club caught up with her. Saint Stabs! Exclusive interview, please! A portable spotlight blinded Jazz as a hovering camera drone zoomed uncomfortably close to her face. Behind the light stood a human woman with the kind of artificially enthusiastic expression that suggested either powerful stimulants or a career in underground journalism. "I'm Kiki Chi, SpindleNet Undercity News." The woman thrust a microphone toward Jazz's face like it was a weapon. "The people want to know, did you pick the name Saint Stabs because of your knife or because you like to stab things?" Jazz blinked against the light. "There is no Saint Stabs. That's not a thing." "You single-handedly destroyed the notorious Fixed Gladiator Ring. You defeated 3 gang leaders with household cleaning products. You've become a symbol of resistance against oppression." Kiki's smile stretched wider with each proclamation. "I stabbed a guy and tripped over a revolution, okay?" Jazz corrected. "Everything else is propaganda." "What drove you to become a vigilante hero?" Kiki pressed, undeterred. Jazz pinched the bridge of her nose, feeling a headache blooming behind her eyes. "Listen, I just want a BLT sandwich and a nap. I don't even like people." "Yet you've liberated dozens from illegal fighting pits!" Kiki squealed with excitement. "Eee!" "Happy accident," Jazz shrugged. Is it true you were a military operative before coming to Spindle Prime?" Kiki's eyes gleamed with the predatory satisfaction of someone who'd done actual research. Jazz stiffened. "Combat engineer, not the same thing." "And the famous knife, the one that started it all." Kiki gestured to Jazz's boot, where the outline of Clementine was faintly visible. Something in Jazz's expression must have changed, because Kiki took a half step back, even as she pressed the question. With slow deliberation, Jazz withdrew Clementine from her boot. The blade caught the camera light, sending fractured reflections dancing across the alley walls. She twirled it once, an unconscious habit from years of nervous fidgeting. "This is Clementine," Jazz said quietly. "I got this knife when I was a combat engineer. Clementine got me out of a lot of trouble, saved my life a few times." She slid the knife back into her boot. "But I'm not a combat engineer anymore, and I don't use Clem for any sort of violence." Kiki's professional smile faltered momentarily, revealing something almost genuine, but the moment passed quickly. "What about the political situation on Spindle Prime? Do you see yourself as an agent of change against the corrupt administration, or are your actions a statement against Xantharian domination, security forces? Is the human resistance movement funding your operations?" Jazz blinked. "What human resistance? You know what? I'm done here." She turned, shouldered past the camera operator, and walked rapidly away. Behind her, she could hear Kiki shouting more questions, but Jazz had already mentally filed the encounter under problems to forget about immediately. That resolution lasted approximately 6 hours. By the next morning, edited clips from the interview were playing on every screen in the Undercity, and more alarmingly, on the official Spindle Prime government channels. Someone had isolated the moment when Jazz had drawn Clementine, slowed it down, and added ominous music. Her casual knife flip had been transformed into a threatening gesture. "Terrorist threat level elevated," scrolled across the bottom of the screens. "Deranged human threatens station security." The accompanying commentary painted a picture of Jazz as a human supremacist with violent tendencies and a personal vendetta against non-human authorities. "Oh, come on," Jazz groaned from her newest hiding spot. An abandoned storage container that smelled faintly of fermented dairy. What the government propaganda machine hadn't anticipated was the Undercity reaction. Within hours, graffiti bearing Jazz's likeness and slogans like "Saint Stabs sees all" began appearing on walls. The bladed doctrine publicly denounced the government's portrayal and released their own footage of Jazz's gladiator pit takedown. Hashtag Team Saint Stabs began trending on the galactic net. Merchandise appeared, t-shirts, hollow stickers, action figures with real stabbing action. One particularly entrepreneurial vendor even sold authentic replicas of Clementine, which looked nothing like the actual knife. Jazz, meanwhile, had acquired a wide-brimmed hat and a hooded cape that smelled like something had died in it. They probably had. With her face hidden, she finally reached the part of the Undercity rumored to house a legendary food stall serving actual, honest-to-God, BLTs with real ingredients. The sandwich stand was attached to a dive bar called the Rusty Spanner. Jazz ordered the premium BLT with extra bacon and took a seat at the bar, inhaling the aroma of non-processed food with something approaching religious reverence. Just as she raised the sandwich to her lips, a man in a suspiciously well-tailored suit slid into the stool beside her. "Jazz Vaclav," he said pleasantly, flashing an identification badge that bore the Spindle Prime government seal. "Mind if we have a chat?" Jazz considered running. She considered breaking the man's nose with her forehead. She considered both options simultaneously. Instead, she lowered her sandwich and began to stand. The man's hand clamped around her waist, not aggressively, but with enough force to make his intention clear. "Sit down, Jazz. I just want to talk." Jazz eyed her BLT mournfully as the scent of fresh bacon taunted her. Her stomach growled with protest. "You've got 30 seconds, she said, settling back into the stool. "I'm Administrator Emery Cloverfields, head of Spindle Prime's Public Relations and Social Stability Division," the man said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Nice name. Hard to imagine a Cloverfield in this shithole, huh?" Jazz quipped. Despite her rising anxiety, she suddenly felt too sick to eat. "You, Miss Vaclav, have become quite the problem for us." Cloverfields tapped his chin in thought. "I've become a problem for you?" Jazz's eyebrows shot up. "You tried to confiscate my personal property, labeled me a terrorist, and the galactic net turned me into a fucking meme. I think you might be confused about who's causing problems for whom. I just want off this station." Jazz took a deep breath, steadying herself. "If you just give me fuel for my freighter, I'll get out of here." Cloverfield sighed. The performative exhaustion of a bureaucrat who believed his time was more valuable than anyone else's. "The situation has evolved beyond our initial expectations. We've established a special task force dedicated to your case. Fantastic. Another reason for me to leave this garbage heap of a station. That might be difficult. We've impounded your ship, the sad bastard, for safety violations. Jazz's fingers twitched toward her boot, toward Clementine. She forced them to relax. What do you want from me? Cloverfield's smile widened, showing too many teeth. We want to offer you a job. A startled laugh escaped Jazz's throat. You're shitting me. Not at all. The public relations battle is not going in our favor. The Undercity population has embraced you as some sort of folk hero. Rather than continue fighting this narrative, we propose to incorporate it. A special deputized position, badge, benefits, official sanction to continue your activities within certain parameters. You want to make me a cop? Jazz asked, incredulously. We want to give the people what they want, a symbol they can believe in, someone who represents justice and order in a chaotic environment. Cloverfields leaned closer. And we're willing to make it worth your while. Jazz stared at him, then at her untouched BLT. Her stomach rumbled again, louder this time. Thanks for the offer, she said finally, but I'm gonna pass. I'm not interested in being anyone's corrupt mascot. Cloverfield's smile disappeared like it had never existed. Without breaking eye contact, he reached over and pulled Jazz's plate toward himself. He picked up her BLT and took a large bite, chewing slowly. Delicious, he said after swallowing. Best in the Undercity, they say. Jazz watched him eat her sandwich, feeling each bite as a personal affront. In that moment, Cloverfields represented everything wrong with Spindle Prime. The casual cruelty, the corruption, the way those in power took whatever they wanted while the rest starved. You won't like what happens if you refuse officially, Cloverfield continued between bites. You can't escape, so why not make it easy on yourself? Jazz stared at him for a long moment. Then, with deliberate slowness, she reached out, grasped the back of Cloverfield's expensively groomed head, and slammed his face down onto the plate with enough force to shatter the ceramic. I really wanted that sandwich, she snapped as Cloverfield slumped, stunned but still conscious. Before anyone could react, Jazz vaulted over the bar, sprinted through the kitchen, and disappeared out the service entrance. Behind her, she could hear shouts and the crack of security batons against skulls as government officials poured into the establishment. She navigated the Undercity by instinct, taking random turns and doubling back until she was reasonably certain she'd lost any pursuit. Only then did she allow herself to slow down, breath burning in her lungs. Fuck, she whispered, leaning against a corroded wall. Now I'm never going to get my BLT. The next 2 weeks introduced Jazz to new frontiers in personal hygiene limitations. She slept in dumpsters, maintenance shafts, and once, memorably, inside an automated waste processing unit that had been decommissioned after developing sentience and refusing to process organic matter on ethical grounds. I don't blame you, Jazz told the machine as she curled up inside its cavernous sorting chamber. Nobody should have to deal with other people's shit. The machine hummed in what might have been agreement. By day 17 of her fugitive lifestyle, Jazz had taken to having full conversations with Clementine. Not because she'd lost her mind, she assured herself, but because extended isolation was boring as hell. Oh, Clementine, we're really in it now, she sighed. polishing the blade with a scrap of relatively clean fabric. All I wanted was fuel and a sandwich. Now we're public enemy number 1. I've accidentally started a cult, and I still haven't had a proper BLT. Do you think there's a lesson in all of this? Clementine gleamed silently in the dim light filtering through a ventilation grate. Yeah, that's what I thought too. People are the worst. While Jazz conducted knife-based therapy sessions, the situation on Spindle Prime deteriorated rapidly. Her absence had triggered a power vacuum in the Undercity. The gangs she disrupted fought to reclaim territory. The bladed Doctrine robots, lacking their prophesied leader, began interpreting random events as divine instructions, resulting in a series of increasingly bizarre crusades against household appliances. The government's attempts to quell the unrest only worsened matters. Heavy-handed security crackdowns led to protests, which led to riots, which led to more crackdowns in a perfect circle of escalating stupidity. Through it all, Jazz's legend grew. Conspiracy theories flourished. She was planning a full-scale revolution. She'd been captured and executed. She'd escaped on a stolen military vessel. She was hiding among them, waiting for the right moment to return. Only the last one contained a grain of truth. On the 21st day of her self-imposed exile, Jazz made a decision. She was tired. She was filthy. She was sick of hiding. And perhaps the most importantly, she was thoroughly pissed off. Fine, she told Clementine as she strapped the knife to her thigh. Let's clean house. The upper levels of Spindle Prime existed in a different universe from the Undercity. While people below fought over scraps and lived in a squalor, the elite lounged in climate-controlled luxury, dining on imported delicacies and discussing the unfortunate disturbances in the lower sectors as if they were speaking about a minor weather event. Infiltrating this paradise required finesse, timing, and a series of increasingly improbable disguises. Jazz moved through the station's middle levels as a maintenance worker, then a drone delivery service employee, then finally as part of the catering staff for what appeared to be the social event of the season. Governor Tharex's annual Unity Gala. The irony of celebrating unity while the station tore itself apart wasn't lost on Jazz as she surveyed the grand atrium from behind a serving tray of canopies. The space was a monument to conspicuous consumption, with crystal chandeliers, live exotic flora, and gravity-defying ice sculptures. Every power player on Spindle Prime was in attendance. Corporate executives, government officials, security chiefs, and the various parasites that orbited them. Jazz spotted Administrator Cloverfield near the central fountain, his face showing faint bruising that expensive cosmetic treatments hadn't entirely concealed. The governor himself, a Xantharian of the royal subspecies, with an exoskeleton that shimmered with bioluminescent patterns, stood on a raised platform preparing to address the crowd. Beside him was a familiar face, the security officer who had first tried to confiscate Clementine. Jazz's lips curved into a smile that would have made a predator nervous. She'd spent the previous 2 days preparing for this moment, hacking into the station systems through maintenance access points, planting devices at strategic locations, and studying the security protocols for the event. Now, as the governor tapped his glass for attention, Jazz slipped away from the serving staff and made her way to an inconspicuous control panel, disguised as a decorative feature.
Distinguished guests,
The governor began, his translated voice booming through the atrium.
we gather today to celebrate the unity and prosperity of Spindle Prime, even in these challenging times.
Jazz punched in a code sequence. Throughout the atrium, tiny disruptors activated, temporarily disabling the security personnel's communication devices and weapon systems.
While some malcontents seek to disrupt our way of life, we stand firm in our commitment to order and progress.
A second sequence cut the main lights, plunging the atrium into darkness. Before the backup systems could engage, Jazz had hijacked the massive hollow screens that decorated the walls. They flickered to life, each displaying her face. Not the scowling mugshot from security footage, but a calm, determined expression recorded hours earlier. "Hello, assholes." Jazz's voice echoed through the atrium as emergency lighting bathed everything in blood-red hues. "Sorry to crash your party, but we need to talk." Chaos erupted as security personnel fumbled with non-functional equipment. The elite guests clustered together like startled cattle, their couture formal wear suddenly looking ridiculous in the emergency lighting. "You tried to brand me with headlines," the recording continued, as Jazz herself moved silently through the crowd, tactical armor concealed beneath a stolen ball gown. "You tried to market me as your monster, but monsters don't wear capes. They wear your uniforms. They sign your executive orders. They steal food from people's plates while talking about justice." On screen, Jazz's recorded image held up Clementine. "This knife isn't a weapon of mass destruction, but your policies are. Your corruption is. Your indifference is." By now, Jazz had reached the central power distribution node, hidden behind an ornamental panel. She produced the real Clementine from beneath her dress. "You wanted a symbol," the recording asked as Jazz drove her knife into the power core. "Here's your damn symbol." Electricity arced, blue, white, and vengeful. The station's main system shuddered as surge protectors failed in cascading sequence. Every surveillance camera on Spindle Prime went dark. Every government database froze mid-operation. Every security system reset to default parameters. For 7 seconds, Spindle Prime experienced what could only be described as a full governmental reboot. When the emergency systems finally stabilized, Jazz was standing on the governor's platform, Clementine back in its sheath. The security officer who'd started this whole mess lay at her feet, unconscious, but breathing. The governor himself cowered behind his ornate chair. She turned to address the governor directly. "You have 24 hours to release my ship, institute elections for undercity representation, and announce a full investigation into corruption among station officials." She smiled, showing teeth. "Or I come back and get creative." With that, she triggered the final device, a smoke bomb that filled the atrium with harmless but thoroughly disorienting mist. By the time it cleared, Jazz was gone. The aftermath wasn't clean or simple or wrapped in a tidy narrative bow. Real change never is. Spindle Prime didn't transform overnight into a utopia of equality and good governance. The Undercity didn't suddenly enjoy the same privileges as the upper levels. Corruption didn't vanish in a puff of righteous indignation. But things changed. The governor, faced with both public pressure and the very real fear of what getting creative might entail implemented reforms. Elections were held, security protocols were reviewed, several high-ranking officials, including Administrator Cloverfields, resigned amid investigations into financial irregularities. The Bladed Doctrine found purpose as community organizers, their peculiar religious fervor channeled into neighborhood improvements. Gang violence decreased as legitimate opportunities for economic advancement emerged. And Jazz Vaclav, she got her ship back. The sad bastard was released from impound with a full tank of premium fuel and, as an unofficial peace offering, a care package from the station's finest restaurant, including 2 artisanal BLT sandwiches made with hydroponic heirloom tomatoes, synthesized bacon, indistinguishable from the real thing, and freshly baked sourdough bread. As Spindle Prime receded in her viewport, Jez settled into the captain's chair, unwrapping the first sandwich with the reverence it deserved. She took a bite and closed her eyes, savoring the perfect balance of salt, fat, acid, and crunch. "Worth it?" she asked Clementine, which rested on the console beside her. The news played in the background. Reports of reform initiatives, debates about revolution, speculation about the mysterious human vigilante who had vanished as suddenly as she'd appeared. Some believed she was still on the station. Others claimed she'd never existed at all, just a convenient symbol onto which people had projected their desires for change. Jazz smirked at Clementine, then picked up the knife and turned it in the light. She pitched her voice higher, making Clementine speak. "Miss Vaclav, are we going to save the next station too?" Jazz laughed, a genuine sound that contained equal parts exhaustion and relief. She took another bite of her sandwich. The best BLT in the galaxy, earned the hard way. "Only if they try to take my knife," she answered with her mouth full. "Or my sandwich. I'm adding sandwiches to the list of things worth fighting for." Clementine didn't respond. But then again, it didn't need to. Some partnerships transcended conversation. Jazz keyed in coordinates for the next port, brushing crumbs from her lap. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't a revolutionary. She wasn't even particularly civic-minded. She was just a woman with a knife, a ship called the Sad Bastard, and extremely firm boundaries about what belonged to her. Sometimes that was enough to change a world, or at least get a really good sandwich.